We all know that the Aron was hidden before the Churban Bayis Rishon. Where it was hidden is interesting, but much more interesting is why it was hidden and how come Shlomo Hamelech built that contingency into the construction of the Beis Hamikdash in the first place. The impact it has on future Beit Hamikdash is profound, and the lesson that it has for us is also really important. We're going to learn about this in the Rambam. In Onoi, Perek Dalef in Beis Hamikdash, the beginning of the 4th chapter of Hilchos Beis Hamikdash, which discusses the laws of the Beis Hamikdash. Nachdem the Rambam schreibt, was hat sich gefunden in Kodesh HaKadoshim, after the Rambam lists for us the various items that were found in the Holy of Holies, then he tells us, as Even Hoysa b'Kodesh HaKadoshim b'Mayravai, to the west of the Kodesh HaKadoshim was a unique rock, She'alea haya ha'aron munach chulei, and the Aron sat on that rock. And then is a mamshech, he continues with what sounds like a piece of history rather than a piece of halacha. When Shlomo Hamelech built the Beis Hamikdash, and he knew that eventually it would be destroyed, therefore he created a subterranean place to keep the Aron, with these twisty, deep tunnels that he used in order to create a labyrinth of places within which he could hide the Aron. That was the plan of Shlomo Hamelech. Fast forward a few generations, then Yoshio, when he was the king, instructed V'gonzu b'makim shabono Shlomo, and they hid the Aron in the place that Shlomo Hamelech had allocated for this purpose. Shlomo, as the pasuk tells us, that Yoshio Hamelech told the Levim, which may actually be the Kohanim, who are the ones advising the Jewish people, that what they should do is that Hakadoshim Lashem, those who are holy in Hashem, Tenu es Aron HaKodesh, you should take that holy ark and put it in the special chamber that Shlomo Hamelech made. Ein lachem masev akasev ato, you no longer at this point are going to carry the Aron going further on your shoulders, as is mandated by the Torah. But now you serve the Eibishter, so to speak, in a different way, in the absence of the Aron. Then the Rambam continues to tell us that the various other implements that were inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim were buried or hidden together with the Aron somewhere deep down below the Har HaBayis. And none of them returned at the time of the Bayis Sheni. Not Aaron's staff, not the container of the Mon, not the Luchos, etc. And then he tells us something which seems a little unrelated. The Urim V'Tumim, which was part of the Choshen that the Kohen Gadol had to wear. In fact, it was in a flap behind the actual breastplate of the Choshen. That existed in the Bayis Sheni, but they did not. The Urim V'Tumim did not allow communication with Ruach HaKodesh as had happened previously in the time of the first Beis Hamikdash. There's a question here that we have to address. Most of what we're going to see now when we refer to Mefarshim is coming from the Yavitz. Why is it relevant to us in practical halachic terms, which is the objective of the Rambam? To know all of this detail. The Aron is nignas gevarin, to know where the Aron was hidden, when it happened, who instructed it. Divrei Harambam b'Sifrei Yad HaChazaka Zayin Doch, to quote again from the Yavitz, the language and usage of terminology that the Rambam uses in the Yad HaChazaka is lehalocha amurim, always focused on telling us halacha, or dvarim she'ein yotzim mehadinim v'lo musav anhag v'yidiyah hatzricha, and anything which is not going to teach us practical halacha or important information or perspective that we have to have, then typically the Rambam would not include in Yad HaChazaka. So why is this historical information there? Question 1. Question 2, Nachmer, let's make the question more intense. This information about who and where and when the Aron was hidden is actually subject to debate. So why does the Rambam then choose one version of how the whole process happened and say that this is actually what happened, when after all the Rambam is telling us halacha, not clarifying historical details? Some Mefarshim Fa'erfrin, going back to the Yavitz and others, they explain that there is a very important reason why the Rambam had to teach us this, and this is lefishi tosoi shetofas lo lekamen beperek vav ma'alochas halolu. Because if you go a little further, this is chapter 4. Go to chapter 6 of the Rambam's perspective on the Beis Hamikdash, and you will see his outlook, which is shekedushas habayis lo botla, that it's central to the Rambam's argument that the holiness of the Beis Hamikdash never ceased. Why? Because the Rambam's view that the holiness of the Beis Hamikdash never ceased, even when the Beis Hamikdash was not standing, that goes with the version that says where was the Aron hidden, directly beneath its allocated place under the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And one of the key factors of the Beis Hamikdash and its holiness is who may or may not enter certain areas of the Beis Hamikdash, and it would appear that the restriction against going into the area, the Heichal of the Beis Hamikdash, is dependent on whether or not the ark is there. Because the pasuk puts the two into the same breath. And when it tells us that people are not supposed to come into the area that faces the curtain in front of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, it also says that that is the time where there is a kaporos, which is the cover of the Aron, implying that the holiness is determined by the presence of the Aron, and therefore it would seem that the Rambam wants us to know that the Aron was buried directly beneath the Kodesh HaKadoshim, so that the Beis Hamikdash would retain its holiness, which is a beautiful explanation, aber tzarich in dem tirutz, but this question actually leaves us with a big, this answer leaves us with a big question. Weil for a number of reasons. Number one, Noisef Lozeh, was the Rambam Alen is Mevor Taimoi. The Rambam actually tells us why he believes that the holiness of the Beis Hamikdash never ceased. Why it is that the initial sanctifying of the Beis Hamikdash lasted into the future. He doesn't make a contingent on the Aron. He says the reason the Beis Hamikdash remains perpetually holy is because the holiness of the Beis Hamikdash is linked to the Shechina, and the Shechina obviously never ceases. And so it really makes no difference where the Aron is at any particular time. The Shechina is there, and according to the Rambam Shari, that's what makes the difference. But besides that is nit move on. The other part that makes this answer unsatisfactory to us is because the Rambam could have conveyed that message really briefly by saying, as Aron bima koimoi nignos, that the Aron was buried in its place. So that would be much clearer than having to wade through all of the information that the Rambam gave and extrapolate that the message is the Aron is buried beneath its place in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and we wouldn't need so much detail. Also, Aleph, but the Rambam is, but what are you going to see? Look what the Rambam actually does. First of all, he's soisim. He doesn't give us that clarity. He says, Bona boy mokim lignois boy ha'aron. That he says Shlomo Hamelech built within it a place to hide the Aron. The logical way that we'd understand that is that Shlomo Hamelech built into the complex of the Beis Hamikdash, not specifically of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, a place for the Aron. Because that's the context, what the Rambam is speaking about just before that. When it's a Kodesh HaKadoshim, and we wouldn't naturally think, go further back in the Rambam's explanation and see that the Aron is in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and then remember that boy over here means that the place to hide the Aron is beneath the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So if the message is that having the Aron is what's going to keep the Beis Hamikdash holy, the main message is not communicated in what the Rambam says. The idea of the Aron being buried in its place is in no way communicated by the Rambam. Besides that, there are three other questions. Beis. Why doesn't the Rambam quote the same pasuk which the Gemara quotes, which is Vayehi Sham ad Hayoim Hazeh, that the Aron is still there till Mashiach comes? Which would emphasize the fact that the Aron is still in its place, and therefore the Beis Hamikdash still has its holiness. If that's the message, quote the pasuk. Gimel ve'ikar, and a key part of our trying to understand what the Rambam is saying is, das verändert den ganzen etwa, was der Rambam bringt, jede Idee als Yeshiyahu hat Genes given dem Aron. Why is it important then to know that the Rambam holds like the view that it was Yeshiyahu who's the one who buried the Aron, or hid the Aron? But das ist klar nicht negelo ihnen. Surely that has nothing to do with our message. Our topic is the Beis Hamikdash a holy place because of the presence of the Aron? Yes or no? Who hid it, when it was in? Irrelevant. So tzid Aron is b'mkayim nignos, or then lishkas ha'etzim. It actually makes no difference if the Aron is beneath the Kodesh HaKadoshim or in or around the place where they stored the wood for the Mizbeach, which are the two views. Which view we go with surely doesn't help to clarify the Rambam's message. And Daled Nachmer in die beide in Yonah benegea dem mokim genizas Aron on veres hatim genas given. Now this whole debate as to where the Aron was put and who is responsible for having hidden it there is the Rambam marich mit kama v'chama pratim. The Rambam adds a whole bunch of details that don't really seem to be important to the message or the halacha. Aleph, Shlomo Hamelech hat gebaut im Ort, wozu gehen sein dem Aron? Why do we have to know that Shlomo Hamelech was the person who designed the safe house for the Aron? Why is it relevant for us to know the nature of this subterranean tunnel system, that it was deep and that it was, twisty and turny? Gimel, why do we have to know as Yoshio Hamelech Tziva v'Gonzu, Nitztam Gonzu? Why do we have to know that Yoshio instructed them to hide the Aron? Why don't we just say, and they hid it, or he hid it? Daled, as v'Gonzu b'machim Shabbat Shlomo, nit v'Gonzu Sham. And why does he have to reiterate that he hid it in the place that Shlomo Hamelech had designed? Why doesn't he just say, and he hid it there? You've already told me it's a place that Shlomo Hamelech designed. And hey, I bring to the Faraya from Pasuk. Why does the Rambam have to quote a pasuk to prove this point? This whole pasuk about the Levium, and you're not going to have Masa B'Kosev anymore, carrying the Aron on your shoulders, but you're still going to have the Avodah. And Vov is the Tzumatik from pasuk Eich Diverta. How come, if the Rambam is going to quote the pasuk, why does he include words which don't seem to necessarily be relevant to his message? Lelevim, Amavinim, L'chol Yisrael, Akdoshim L'Hashem, Ben David Melech Yisrael, Ein Lochem Masa B'Kosev, Ata Ivdos Hashem L'Keichem V'Gomer. All this information, it's the Levim who carry the Aron, and that it's a place that was built by Shlomo, the son of David HaMelech, and that you're not going to carry it on your shoulder anymore. Surely the pasuk is just there to show us that Yoshio actually buried or hid the Aron in the place that Shlomo Hamelech had allocated, and stop there. We don't have to know the rest of the structure of the society and who's carrying, not carrying, etc. Was is din afkusa ledina von diale protim. And now, bearing in mind that the Rambam's intention is to teach us halacha, there are many details in the way that he talks about where they hid the Aron that don't seem to have any relevance in a practical halachic way. So why does he quote them? Now, before we get to any answers, a few other questions. We have to understand a few other things. Look how the Rambam says with such simplicity, such ease. Shlomo Hamelech knew the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed, therefore he made and designed a place to hide the Aron. It's mashma. That sounds like okay. So it's clear to Shlomo Hamelech, he knows absolutely the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed. So he invents the idea of having a hiding place for the Aron. That's interesting. Which is based on the fact that he intuited that the Beis Hamikdash is going to be destroyed. Now that seems to fly in the face of how the construction of the Beis Hamikdash was meant to happen. It's Terumah. It's very strange. Every single detail of the Beis Hamikdash is based on a direct, specific instruction from Hashem. As the pasuk says, "Hakol b'chsav miyad Hashem olay yeskil." Everything described, written, recorded as the Eibusher told me to do. If the entire detail of every facet of the Beis Hamikdash is guided by Hashem, how is it that the safe house for the Aron is Shlomo Hamelech's initiative? How does that fit? The whole point of it here is to say that it is part of the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore the Aron is still in the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore the Beis Hamikdash still has its holiness, but then it's not treated like the rest of the Beis Hamikdash, and it's this voluntary annex that Shlomo Hamelech makes. Second question. Surely the Rambam's point over here is to tell us about what happened to the Aron at the time of the Churban Beis Rishon. Why the Urim v'Tumim? How does that creep into this conversation? The easiest answer would be to say, well, they both share something in common. Neither of them was present, or at least not in its normal form, in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. Fine. The only thing is that the Urim v'Tumim does not belong in this section of halacha, which is describing the construction of the building of the Beis Hamikdash. And the Urim v'Tumim rather belongs not to Bigdei Kehuna, in the place where we describe the garments that are supposed to be available to the Kohanim. Was Mekomim is in Hilchos Klei Hamikdash v'ha'ovdim bo, and that section is in a whole different area of halacha, the laws of the vessels of the Beis Hamikdash. And the Rambam brings a Stake dort, which, by the way, the Rambam discusses the Urim v'Tumim and all of these details there too. Why then does the Rambam mention it here in Hilchos Beis HaBechira, which is not on the topic of the Kohanim's clothing, just because it has this generalized link that, yes, just like the Aron was not present in the second Beis HaMikdash, the Urim v'Tumim did not communicate through Ruach HaKodesh in the second Beis HaMikdash. What's it got to do with our conversation? So wenn man das verstehen, dem Ort, wo die das Galoche steht in Rambam, as is often the case when studying the Rambam, when we realize where the Rambam places a particular halacha in the context, that gives us a tremendous insight into what the Rambam wants to communicate to us. So let's get the context, let's get the chronology over here. In Onem Hilchos Beis HaBechira Zok the Rambam starts the entire discussion of the Beis HaBechira, the laws concerning the Beis Hamikdash, by saying this. The following elements are absolutely critical to build a Beis Hamikdash, namely, and then he describes the various structural components, including the Kodesh where the menorah, the Shulchan, and the Mizbech HaKetoros were, and the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which is where the Aron was, etc. And then he tells us that once you have the Beis Hamikdash, you are supposed to make certain implements that belong inside the Beis Hamikdash. And he says, this goes here and that goes there, and he tells us all the various things are. That's right at the beginning. In the Perek Beis V'Gimel, and you get into the second and third Perek of the laws of the Beis HaBechira, he describes what the various vessels looked like. The menorah was this high and it had that many branches, and the kiyah looked like this, and the Aron looked like that. On a Perek Revi, in the fourth chapter, then Tzuras Habayis, he talks about the actual layout of the Beis Hamikdash, Koisle Habayis, how tall the walls were, how far they ran, Heichal, the height of the Heichal building, how big it was, She'arim V'chulei, the nature of the gates, what materials are made of, etc. Steltzach der Shaila, that then presents us with the following question. The Aron balangt l'cheret zu Klei Hamikdash. You would assume that the Aron is one of the vessels of the Beis Hamikdash, which means it should be listed and described together with the other vessels of the Beis Hamikdash, which is not what the Rambam does. Why then is the Rambam talking about all of this detail about what happened to the Aron and where it was supposed to be put in case of an emergency in the section that's describing the actual building structure of the Beis Hamikdash above ground? That drives home the message to us as das was the Aron gefindt sich in Kodesh HaKadoshim. Having the Aron in the Kodesh HaKadoshim is ledas Rambam. From the Rambam's perspective, is apart von Tzuras Habayis, part of the structural design of the Beis Hamikdash. In other words, could you have a Beis Hamikdash without the menorah being part of the design? Yes, but not the Aron. If the Aron is excluded, it's no longer a Beis Hamikdash. The Aron is nicht nur a keli. In other words, he's not describing the Aron purely as another element of the Beis Hamikdash. Was gefindt sich in Kodesh HaKadoshim, which will be placed or located in the Holy of Holies. Like, let's say the menorah or the shulchan, which are kelim, that then have a particular place where they belong inside the heichal. Now, there's a tale from the Kodesh HaKadoshim binyan atzmai. Rather, the Rambam's view is that the Aron is an integral part of what makes the Kodesh HaKadoshim into the Holy of Holies. And the reason for that is because having the Aron over there would turn this building into Hashem's home, like the pasuk says that the Eibishter communicates to Moshe Rabbeinu, I will engage with you, I will commune with you there. Where is there? From the Aron, in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Without it, the Beis Hamikdash does not fulfill its purpose. That's why the Rambam does not talk about the Aron together with the other vessels of the Beis Hamikdash. In Anai B'Hilchos Beis HaBechira, on his list at the beginning of the B'Hilchos Beis HaBechira, that in the Beis Hamikdash you're supposed to have vessels. This is the list of the vessels. But the Aron is because the role and purpose of the Aron is not simply to be a vessel inside the Beis Hamikdash. This is a tale from Kodesh HaKadoshim. Rather, it is part of the structural integrity of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which is interesting because it's not built into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and yet his message is without the Aron being placed in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Kodesh HaKadoshim is empty and meaningless, and by extension, the whole Beis Hamikdash is meaningless. Now, if that is the Rambam Shita, that you cannot have a Beis Hamikdash without an Aron, what happened in the second Beis Hamikdash? Now we've got a big issue on our hands. If you follow that logic, then by the second Beis Hamikdash, where there was no Aron occupying the Kodesh HaKadoshim, is the Kodesh HaKadoshim from welcher Aron is achelig nicht given b'shleimusai. Then clearly the Kodesh HaKadoshim was not intact. It wasn't the way it was meant to be. Das heißt, as Beis Sheni hat gefällt, nicht nur a Prat. That means the second Beis Hamikdash wasn't just missing one of a list of items. It was missing one of the things that is integral to the building being considered a Beis Hamikdash. How could there be a Beis Hamikdash Hasheni without an Aron? Then it's not a Beis Hamikdash. It's a building that looks like the Beis Hamikdash, but doesn't function like the Beis Hamikdash because it has no Aron. So that's what the Rambam wants to address. In order to address it, the Rambam has to tell us all of the details of where the Aron landed up in, of course, the time of the second Beis Hamikdash. Was damit wird verstandig, als euch Beis Sheni hat nicht gefällt bebinyan Rabbi, is to reassure us that even in the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, where there was no physical Aron, visible or accessible, the Beis Hamikdash was still a Beis Hamikdash. How does that work? The Birba's explanation is this. Das, was der Rambam sagt. What did the Rambam tell us? He told us of Eisha, the fact that the Rambam made a point of telling us that when Shlomo Hamelech built the Beis Hamikdash, that's when he created the annex for the Aron. Is a kavanah that was intentional, and his intention is not just simply to give us a location. So if we ever wanted to go on an expedition to find the Aron, we'd know where to start looking. What's irrelevant? What happened in the past truly is history and not part of halacha. Why does the Rambam tell us that Shlomo Hamelech designed the building this way lechatchile? Because not a mate mit dem chadash adin in binyan habayis, because he is clarifying or he's introducing to us a halacha about the Beis Hamikdash we would never have known, namely. The Genesis Aron is not da from b'di evet ve'les bereira. It's not just that Shlomo Hamelech was such a brilliant person, so he knew that there would be at some point an emergency, and then we would need, out of lack of options, to hide the Aron somewhere. So let's just prepare for that and have a good plan B in place. That's not what's motivating Shlomo Hamelech. No, by binyan habayis is min chatchila ausgestellt geworden. Instead, Shlomo Hamelech sets out right at the beginning to create a Beis Hamikdash that will have as the Arons or Kilo Habens famous komis in Beis Hamikdash, that before the Beis Hamikdash opens its doors and begins functioning, there will already be two options of where in the Beis Hamikdash the Aron belongs. Not where it belongs and where we'll hide it when we're under duress. There are two places the Aron belongs. Aleph Amogim Golu, one of those places is obvious. If the Evan Shia b'Kodesh HaKadoshim, on that special rock from which the world was created, which sits in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, in addition to which, Beis Hamokim to Geina Zainem Lamata Kodesh HaKadoshim, and there's an alternate place where the Aron belongs when and if it has to be hidden, b'matmoines hamukos v'kalkolos, in these subterranean, confusing tunnels. Der Ort is milchatchile a chelik from the Beis, but the Rambam is showing us that annex is from the start part of the precinct of the Beis Hamikdash. It's considered in the Beis Hamikdash still. Das heißt, in other words, the Genesis Aron is nicht in Neusef of Beis Hamikdash. It's not like most of us would have thought. There was a Beis Hamikdash, and then there was this place, this bunker where we're going to put the base. We're going to hide the Aron. No, that's not how it works. It's like this emergency procedure that kicks in when the wheels come off. That bunker is part of the laws of how you build a Beis Hamikdash. Just like in order to build a Beis Hamikdash, you have to have a place. It's called the Kodesh HaKadoshim, where the Aron can be exposed in its normal, so to speak, state most of the time. Similarly, the Beis Hamikdash also has to have an alternate space where, at the time that the Aron has to be hidden, it belongs. Aron, a place for the Aron, on the Midved Bavon in Itzchis from Kodesh HaKadoshim, and that will ensure that the Kodesh HaKadoshim is always in its state of full service and full holiness. Because you need the Aron to be in its allocated place somewhere beneath the Kodesh HaKadoshim as its allocated second place of Kodesh HaKadoshim in order for the Kodesh HaKadoshim to work, in order for the Beis Hamikdash to work. And that's the Pirush from Divrei Rambam. That's what the Rambam's telling us. And if we pay attention to his words, we'll see it. At the time that Shlomo built the Beis Hamikdash, and he knew it would one day be destroyed, therefore he built that place. That's not telling us that Shlomo Hamelech had his own voluntary project to build a plan B for the Aron. But rather, when he built the Beis Hamikdash, it was with an awareness of its future destruction. And the same Eibishter who told him to build a Beis Hamikdash told him to build this place, this bunker, to hide it. Because we need to have the Aron in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Is when Shlomo Bolt stam rausgegraben amokim lemata al pi tzivoy, had Shlomo Hamelech just dug out some kind of a place to hide the Beis Hamikdash at some point, nicht wissend dem tachlis therefore, without knowing that maybe should say build a place, you'll find out what it's for on a need to know basis. Had Shlomo Hamelech not known that this place he's burrowing out is for the Aron, then Shlomo Hamelech could never have designated that place as a holy place like the Kodesh HaKadoshim for the Aron. But because he knows that this is the plan, the Beis Hamikdash will stand for 4 centuries and then it's going to fall, and there will be a place where the Aron has to go until Mashiach comes. That's the plan, so therefore he sanctifies it with the same intention that he sanctified the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Is the Rambam Madgish, and the Rambam emphasizes that by telling us that Shlomo Shlomo knew that the end game of his Beis Hamikdash is its destruction, which is the reason why he built the bunker for the Aron. From the beginning, as part of the plans of the Beis Hamikdash, was included this bunker. And the Rambam illustrates to us that it's the right place for this to happen. It's difficult to reach, it's confusing, you're not going to know where it is, it's very deep. So it's designed for concealment, it's designed for protection. The Rambam is illustrating to us that Shlomo Hamelech had the awareness and the intention to sanctify that subterranean bunker for the Aron in the same way as the Kodesh HaKadoshim was sanctified for the Aron. Now that we know that this is what the Rambam wants us to know, we can understand the other historical facts that he includes in his explanation, as Yoshio HaMelech Tziva, that it was Yoshio HaMelech that he instructed. And that where did they hide it? In the place that Shlomo had prepared for this eventuality. In other words, the Rambam wants to further prove to us as that the eventual hiding of the Aron in this bunker wasn't just, okay, we don't know what to do, let's look around, is there a place? Then they discover a place. It was something that was planned right from the start. Yoshiyahu knows he's got to take the Aron to the place that Shlomo Hamelech planned, built, and made for the Aron right from the beginning, Asatel from Kodesh HaKadoshim, which he made as part of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. As the Rambam mevoir. So therefore, the Rambam explains as that's why the Rambam points out that the hiding of the Aron did not happen when the emergency occurred. They didn't wait until the Babylonians were there destroying the Beis Hamikdash and then they quickly ran out to hide the Aron. There's man fun b'di'evet, which would indicate that they just did it out of lack of options. Now, Beis Hamikdash is not given besakona klal, but it was Yoshiyahu Hamelech. In other words, a time where there was no tangible threat to the Jewish people. People familiar with the history of the time will know that Yoshiyahu had a powerful Jewish kingdom. Not only was it not a time of threat when the Aron was moved to its bunker, but it was even moved in a way that reflects how Shlomo Hamelech took the Aron into the Kodesh HaKadoshim in the first place. How so? So the Rambam tells us. Alaf Yoshua Melech is given there was Tzivele Gonze. There is a Jewish king, a righteous Jewish king, giving the instruction of what to do the Aron at this time. That mirrors how Shlomo Hamelech was the one who instructed putting the Aron into the Kodesh HaKadoshim at the launch of the Beis Hamikdash. Beis, the Achnos is durchgeführt geworden durch Halavim am Mevinim l'chol Yisrael HaKadoshim LaHashem. Who does Yoshiyahu instruct to carry the Aron to its hiding place? The Levim, which is technically kohanim, same as by the time of Shlomo Hamelech, where Shlomo Hamelech, it was the kohanim who brought the Aron into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So that's what the Rambam's telling us of here. He says you have to understand this is not emergency protocols. This is a plan, and it's a plan with the intention of keeping the holy integrity of the Beis Hamikdash. And that will also explain the particular words of the pasuk that the Rambam quotes. And the far is the pasuk with Daik to Zog dem Lashon Tenu es Aron HaKadosh Babayis Asher Bona Shlomo Gomer. Two key words over there. Place it in the structure that was made for it. So if it's an emergency, you don't say put the Aron somewhere. You say get the Aron out of here. Now, fakert es is nesina babayis. This is a very orderly, planned process. Put the Aron in the structure that was designated for it. On the far bring the Rambam which explains also why the Rambam quotes more of the pasuk than what we felt was relevant to the discussion. Turns out that the latter part of the pasuk is absolutely relevant to the discussion, because how does the pasuk conclude? Okay, so you're not going to carry the Aron on your shoulders any longer, but now you're going to serve Hashem. Serve Hashem where? In other words, he's saying, he's describing what's going to happen. The Aron is now going to be hidden over Mele, which obviously precludes you from having the option to carry it on your shoulders because it's hidden, you don't have access to it. But still, in spite of the fact that the Aron is inaccessible, that does not mean that the avoid in the Beis Hamikdash grinds to a halt. Nor ivdu es Hashem elokeichem in Beis Hamikdash. That's the instruction of you. Keep doing the avoida in the Beis Hamikdash, which they would continue to do from the time of Yoshua Melech until the Churban. But durch them felt it in Binyan Abayis because the Beis Hamikdash is not lacking. It's not a disabled Beis Hamikdash because the Aron is hidden. That was always the plan, to retain the integrity of the Beis Hamikdash. And now we can understand why the Rambam Dafka quoted the details about the Urim V'Tumim, because it has more than just a passing similarity to our story. Now we understand why the Rambam concludes the halacha by telling us with all of those details about the Urim V'Tumim in the second Beis Hamikdash. Why? The Rambam bringt out Dugma zu dem, was sagt in Chilas Halacha wegen Aron. The Urim V'Tumim serves as an illustration of what he's just explained to us about the Aron. The Aron was still intact and still in the appropriate place, just like the Urim V'Tumim was still intact and in the appropriate place on the chest of the Kohen Gadol. Despite the fact that to the eye of the beholder, it's gone. There's been a significant change. We don't see an Aron in the Beis Hamikdash. Says the Rambam exactly as you're going to see the same kind of thing happen with the Urim V'Tumim, because Urim V'Tumim ladas Rambam seinen gewen bishlemusam euch b'bayis sheni. The Rambam's view is that the Urim V'Tumim was physically present in the second Beis Hamikdash, in the flap behind the Choshen. But despite it being present, like the Aron is present, it's present in a totally different way to how it was in the first Beis Hamikdash, meaning you don't get the messages that you used to get via the Urim V'Tumim. The Urim V'Tumim exist, they exist without any missing pieces, and they do absolutely nothing that we can understand and appreciate. But they're whole, intact, and therefore the Urim V'Tumim count as one of the 8 garments that the Kohen Gadol is required to wear when he's on duty, and it's the same message reinforced for us. Now, with that information, we should now have a completely different appreciation for the second Beis Hamikdash. In fact, not only are we going to have this incredible insight to the second Beis Hamikdash, it's still holy, it's still functional, it's still intact. So not only do we have the Beis Hamikdash with all its pieces, the Aron is like it's in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Now the mitzvah is gebracht a mile in Kedushas Beis Rishon, but we actually now get an insight into something about the holiness of the first Beis Hamikdash we might not have realized. From our perspective, the first Beis Hamikdash only lasted for 4 centuries, so it's not an eternal structure. So it can sein, ungewen Churban Abayis. There was the potential of, and that potential unfortunately was realized in practice, where the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. So, as far as we can see, first Beis Hamikdash ended. But that's not the truth. Aber bei Pnimius ist euch in ihm reingegeben geworden, ein Ingen von Itzchius. The first Beis Hamikdash has a certain eternal element to it, which is, in the structure and design of the first Beis Hamikdash is the bunker, was in em is nicht given Churban, which can never be destroyed. And the Aron is as a result of which the Aron remains there in perpetuity. In other words, the entire holiness of anything that happened till, during, and beyond the second Beis Hamikdash is actually all a continuation of the first Beis Hamikdash. The fact that the first sanctification of Yerushalayim and the Beis Hamikdash is eternal, as we've said, that's because the Shechina is there and the Shechina never gets weakened. But here the Rambam takes it a layer deeper. Sorry, as the way we normally understand it, the area, the geography accommodates the Shechina, and therefore it's got eternal holiness. Says the Rambam, that's true, and more. The building that originally stood on that place as Hashem's home, the first Beis Hamikdash, also has an element to it which is absolutely eternal. The Kodesh HaKadoshim is milchatchila geboit givarn l'shaitai uli yosid lavei, because the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which is the core of the whole Beis Hamikdash, was originally designed not only for its time, but for all time, because of its bunker. Now we have a completely different appreciation of the link, the connection that exists between all three Batei Mikdash. They're not just a succession plan. We're not just saying there are three buildings, one built by Shlomo, one built by Ezra, one that will be built by Mashiach. They happen to be in the same place, they serve the same purpose, they have similar architecture, and that's the link. Now, because is in bias, the truth is it's one building, one structure, one reality. The Beis Hamikdash Hasheni v'chein Hashlishi is b'chelik ikri nit keinaya bias. The second Beis Hamikdash is not 100% new, or the third for that matter. Not the erste Beis ved geboit iberanayis. What's happening is the first Beis Hamikdash is being rebuilt a second and then a third time. Showing in the binyan von Eshem Beis is nikbe gevoren ha'inyan l'shaitel yosid lave kenal, because the first Beis Hamikdash, as we have now learned, was built as an eternal structure, nitzchi, and that eternal structure reappears Hasheni v'Hashlishi as the second and eventually third Beis Hamikdash. And this is quite similar to the concept of resurrection, similar to the idea of what's going to happen when people come back to life when Mashiach comes. What's going to happen when Mashiach comes? David is going to produce brand new bodies for all these souls that have been waiting. We understand that there's some core element of the human body that never dies, the etzem luz, the so-called luz bone, or the essence of the person that never dies, however we are to understand it, and the human is built out of that. In other words, the new human that's going to walk around after Tchias HaMesim is effectively a revamped version of the original human, in welches is nicht kein Shaykh, kein Churban v'Hefsed, who could never disappear. And das Linie von Bona bei Makom Ligna is bei Aron, which is exactly the same principle as Shlomo Hamelech designing this place where the Aron is going to be hidden. The Makom Aron is the Etzem Ika Kanal from the Beis Hamikdash, because the Aron is the core, it's the DNA, it's the essence of the Beis Hamikdash, and welches is nicht Shaykh and Churban v'Hefsed, and that essence can never be destroyed. The second and third Beis Hamikdash have to be built out of that essence rather than superimposed onto the site where the Beis Hamikdash once stood. The perspective the Rambam has given us in this halacha totally revolutionizes our perspective of what it means to be in a state of destruction and a state of golus. In the Beis Hamikdash the Rambam is illustrating to us that it's actually impossible to destroy a Beis Hamikdash. That's not possible. In the Beis Hamikdash, then bias Hashem, there's no question that the Gentiles who destroy the Beis Hamikdash do not, of their own accord, have the capacity or the power to be able to destroy Hashem's home. That is unthinkable. Okay, so what happened? Das, was befehlt can sein, the Churban Abayis, the fact that Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, is the far was in the Beis Hamikdash Gufa, Be'ez Binyone. That's because in the Beis Hamikdash, at the time that it was being built, is given on Sin's Mokum, when I've sure it's a Dim Churban. It was built with a plan to be destroyed. So nobody could destroy a Beis Hamikdash except that the Eibishter created this Beis Hamikdash to be destroyed. Therefore, it is vulnerable. Now, why would the Eibishter do that? Before we get there, let's look at ourselves as Yid. There is no way that the Eibishter designed the world, that the non-Jewish world should have power over us. The only thing is, unfortunately, sometimes we behave in a way that opens us up to be vulnerable to the power of the non-Jewish world, and then we're in trouble. It's not only the non-Jewish world that has no power over us. They heavenly courts have no power over us. The angels have no power over us. The higher spiritual beings have no power over us. Und was muss sein mit der Askama von der Midden. And therefore, if the Beis Din Shamayla decides a particular case against a Jewish person, a particular decision against a Jewish person, it can only happen because the Jewish person did something to draw that particular attention to themselves, as the famous word. That basically what happens is that the Eibishter waits for us to pass judgment on somebody in a similar situation, and then the Beis Din Shamayla can apply that judgment to us. But no force in the world outside of the Eibishter has power over us. Und das sagt der Rambam. That's what the Rambam wants us to know. As das, was es hat gekannt sein, der Churban Abayis, how was it possible the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed? Es war bei Shlomo hat gebaut den Mikdash, hat nicht bloß gewusst, dass Sefer Lechareb. It's because when Shlomo Hamelech built the Beis Hamikdash, not only was he aware of the possibility of its destruction, hat in den Binnen Gufar eingetan dem Nesines Makam of Churbanoi, but Shlomo Hamelech actually created the possibility of destruction by Aron, by creating a plan B for the Aron that allows the possibility of a Churban. Now you'll ask, why would he do that? Aber von dem Gufa, was in dem Zman von Binyan Beis Hamikdash mit der ganze Simcha und Sturm, was ist damit geworden. Think about it. The time of the building of the Beis Hamikdash was a time of such incredible joy, such incredible passion for the Eibishter. At Shlomo Hamelech Gott getracht wegen dem Churban Abayis. And Shlomo Hamelech's head is 400 years down the line thinking about its destruction. Und hat noch getan, apilo bekeshelos, and he actually did something physical because of that awareness and concern. Is moving as the Churban is bems negeh and brings some tachlis from Binyan Abayis. The only feasible explanation for that is that Shlomo Hamelech knew the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash is in the interests of the purpose of the Beis Hamikdash. How's that possible? Babir was it? The Churban Abayis is not given to live in Churban Atzmei chas v'sholem v'chas v'sholem. There is no question about it. We dare not, God forbid, suggest that the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash was an end to itself. No, durch dem zukommen an Aliyah nalis Yisr. The only reason for the Beis Hamikdash being destroyed is only to facilitate something far deeper, more powerful, greater, higher that would follow. What we call Yerida Tzorech Aliyah, a descent that is designed for the purpose of creating ascent. So what's the ultimate that's going to come out of it? The ultimate goal and purpose was the construction of the third Beis Hamikdash, which would be eternal. Und dem wird sein die Schlemmes in Binyan Beis Hamikdash, von es wird sein Binyode de Kutsche Bricha und Mikdashat nekenu Yodecha. And that would be the ultimate. Not only would it last forever, but it would be the ultimate version of the Beis Hamikdash, because as the Zohar identifies, it would be built by Hashem's hands, which of course have no limits. Das ist, was der Rambam sagt. That's why the Rambam tells us, Be'ez shebono Shlomo Habayis. Shlomo Hamelech is building the Beis Hamikdash. He knows I'm a human being. If I'm building something, it must be finite. Therefore, it has to be destroyed at some point. It's a human construction that cannot last indefinitely. On the far, Shlomo Hamelech recognizes the Eibishter asked me to make this, therefore it cannot last forever. Therefore, we have to prepare a place for the Aron, and in such a way that it will retain the kedusha of the Beis Hamikdash. And therefore, effectively, Shlomo Hamelech created the possibility of the destruction, because Shlomo Hamelech wants to facilitate the ultimate state, which is the third Beis Hamikdash. You've got to get there. There are steps. One of those steps is the Beis Hamikdash Harishon, so he builds it. But he builds it with the contingency of its destruction, so that we can get beyond this to version 3.0, which is going to be the ultimate Beis Hamikdash. So the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash is to facilitate the great rebound that will follow. And you can actually see this principle illustrated in what Shlomo Hamelech did. Built a place to hide the Aron, which actually represents two ends of the spectrum. Because those Beis, as the Beis is as on the one hand, Shlomo Hamelech building a bunker for the Aron is the most clear testimony to the fact that he knows and believes the Beis Hamikdash will be destroyed. But on the other hand, building that same bunker is intended to do what? To ensure that the Aron will survive eternally, which effectively means the Beis Hamikdash will survive eternally. So, how ironic. The destruction of the Beis Hamikdash is evidenced by the need to build a bunker for the Aron, which in turn will allow the Beis Hamikdash to last forever. Because even the third Beis Hamikdash is just going to be a reformatting of the first Beis Hamikdash. Durch dem atmen bewohnt as ich in bei Sheni soll nicht fehlen im Binyan Abayis. So the first thing, of course, that Shlomo Hamelech was able to guarantee is that the second Beis Hamikdash would not be lacking in any way. Was noch mehr, das hat bewohnt, as the Aron Gufa soll bleiben ganz, and this ensured, Shlomo Hamelech's actions ensured that the Aron would remain intact. Und von dem wird zurück aufgebaut werden dabei Shishler Kanal Siftes, and of course, as mentioned, because the Aron remains intact, therefore there's the possibility, like the Etzem Luz, to rebuild a whole Beis Hamikdash that is effectively the first Beis Hamikdash being rebuilt. And with that in mind, let's go back to explain from the perspective of Chassidus the three terms that the Rambam uses to describe the tunnels that lead to the place where the Aron is hidden. The drei Shenes, was the Rambam sagt, wegen dem Mokum shegunignas bei Aron, which is b'matmonius, hidden places, amukos, deep, v'kalkolos, and crooked. Der Mittes Rambam Rames dem Iloi, was ist hereingegeben geworden in der Mikdash durch dem, was bei Mokum lignes bei Aron. Basically, the Rambam is alluding to over here with what is the great outcome and the great advantage to creating the space to hide the Aron. On the face of it, the reason that there is this labyrinth beneath the Har HaBayis is in order to protect the Aron at a time of Churban. So we know that the Yerida is designed as a catalyst to wake us up so that we'll do tshuva, so we actually get the ultimate Beis Hamikdash Ashlishi. So the Rambam is telling us, hiding away the Aron and therefore facilitating the Churban Bayis Rishon is supposed to wake up something deep, deep inside of ourselves. The herchste Madregas in Elukus was mitzad atzmam zayin ze matmoini yoisa mukis lishein rabim moik mi matzeno, as the pasuk says. The so-called deep tunnels is supposed to talk about that godliness that is so deep, so profound, so much beyond us. And because it's so far beyond us, through ordinary service of Hashem, just going about doing what we're expected to do, we actually can't reach such elevated levels. But when it comes to tshuva, tshuva is not just behaving as a Jew is meant to behave. No, but that's where a person's gone a winding path. So there's the winding path of misbehavior that leads to the winding positive path of tshuva. That's what facilitates and reveals these deep, deep tunnels. These are things that cannot be accessed in the ordinary way. That you got to kind of come up with some kind of a surprise approach. And we'll see the effects of our tshuva translated practically into the structure of the third Beis Hamikdash, which will be eternal. That should be rebuilt and revealed to us very, very soon. With the ultimate gula with Mashiach, should happen in Hashem right now.